Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. As George said in the introduction, a lot of what in fact, nearly all of what I'm going to talk about today is work that stems from an ESE project that I've been running for the last couple of years, called Investigating the Diffusion of Morphosyntactic Innovations Using Social Media, or for short, we tend to call it the Tweetelectology project, particularly for external consumption, having created a title which means something to linguists and doesn't mean very much at all to the general public. But as it says on the tin, the goal of this project is to try and answer fairly traditional questions in variationist historical and sociolinguistics about morphosyntactic innovation and change, the spread of those changes through geographic space. So I'm going to be showing you various maps during the course of this presentation. And I should emphasize that the goals are fairly traditional, even though some of the methods are not. Right, that's the combination we're talking about. So I'm going to be showing you a corpus of Twitter data that I've been using, and that's the wacky bit of this. But the questions I'm asking are going to be fairly familiar ones and linked to the literature on variables that I'm going to talk about. And that's important. The point of this is to use new methods not to do what the computer can do. And it's also not an investigation of what people do using computer-mediated communication. It's meant to be a window on what they do at other times, and a way of creating a very large corpus of slightly weird but kind of naturalistic data, much larger than we could do in any sociolinguistic survey or any kind of field work. So this project, as George mentioned, is as of last year is kind of run out of Oxford, but traditionally the team and myself have been in Cambridge. So the team is Adrian Lehmann in Bern, Tamsin Blackster in Cambridge, Deepti Gopal in Cambridge, and the IT is Jonathan Mackenzie in Cambridge. And I should thank all of them for their contribution to a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk to you about today. And broadly, we are looking at a range of languages. So the original focus of the project was British English, British and Irish English, sorry, Welsh and Norwegian. And Norwegian has spread out to mainland Scandinavian. As we discovered, it was quite difficult to auto-detect the difference between Norwegian and Danish. And there have been some spin-offs. There's a spin-off on Haitian Creole that I'm doing at the moment, and there are potential spin-offs for Turkish and a couple of other languages, Slovene possibly. The background to this work, there is increasing amounts of research using large-scale social media data. It's increasingly of interest to linguistics, but as I hinted at already, there are certain aspects of it that might make more traditional linguists a bit uneasy. It tends to focus on lexical patterns, and it tends to focus on very large-scale variation. And you might say that if your goal is to show that British English uses the word pavement and American English uses the word sidewalk, that you haven't really discovered anything very, very interesting on your, certainly probably our perspective on this. So in that case, the variable being examined is relatively simple and relatively uninteresting for our type of linguist, and the granularity of geographic information is often quite coarse. So what I'm asking today is whether this kind of work can be developed and integrated into more theoretical and more traditional variationist work in syntax. So onto our corpus. So I'm going to talk today entirely about the British and Irish Twitter corpus. There are slight differences for the others, but not vastly. The differences are mainly caused by the fact that we needed procedures to extract British and Irish English from other varieties of English. For technical reasons, we simply can't store, we don't have big enough computers to store all of the Englishes of the world. And that's not true of the other languages. We can store all the Norwegian in the world. We can store all the Welsh in the world. So this corpus was created by taking a sample of tweets in 2017 to 18, which was a seed corpus based on the automatic geocoordinates that some people, and not very many people, automatically tweet with their messages. Right, around 1 to 3% of people have geospatial information enabled on their tweets, and that says exactly where they are. So we created a seed corpus around a box around Britain and Ireland in 2017 to 18. The reason we didn't want to just use that is that limits you socially to a certain extent. It would be only people with smartphones. It would only be people technically savvy enough to enable the coordination. So we also created a second, or expanded the corpus to include other Twitter users who are mentioned by accounts that have been gathered in the first place. With that creates an initial corpus of 546 million tweets from 6 million people. So you see the sort of size we're talking about. Then that gets whittled down. So in fact, only about a third of that is actually being used. So about 2 million accounts. And that's of those, the accounts that we were able to assign a location to that was within Britain, Ireland, the Isle of Man, or the Channel Islands. So of course that excludes, this method creates some people who aren't really from those places. The bounding box approach includes people who are just were in those areas temporarily, tourists, remember when tourism was possible, people traveling on business, remember when that was possible. So they could have been here temporarily. And those are removed by the second procedure, which is a keyword localization procedure, which scans the biographic information and the timeline of the tweet for place names. And it assigns weight to where exactly they are, what the context is. So if you say born and bred in London, that gives you a very high weighting for London, for instance. So it doesn't use I should make this clear, it doesn't use the geographic information that you send automatically. So it's not about where you physically are. It's using information on what you've said in your account. The point of that, and hopefully I'm in an audience that will be sympathetic to this approach, what we're really interested in is where you grew up and not where you happen to be today on holiday or where you happen to have moved to. And so this is an attempt, and we've checked it, and it does somewhat improve things. This is an attempt to get where you habitually live and ideally where you grew up, where you acquired your language, which is obviously what we're really interested in. Okay, so we get that base corpus, and that's most of what I'm talking about today. That's most of the data I'm going to show you today. There is also, because another thing we're interested in is change. So we don't just want a geographic distribution. We also want to try and see change in progress, apparent time effects. So a proportion of the users were also classified successfully for age. Again, using the same technique, looking at, automatically looking at evidence of age in the Twitter bio, the timeline of tweets. At one of three different levels, so precise if someone actually says what age they are, which a proportion of people do, or imputed by decade or more broadly. The broad one is the most useful in practice because there's more of it. Although because of the demographics of Twitter, you'll see that the three groups are perhaps there's not that much differentiation in the middle. There's a lot of younger users on Twitter, or at least there were, decreasingly so. This will all lead to an interactive atlas, which we're developing right this second, really, which is not that far off being complete, and we will publish online in the summer of 2021. And what you'll be able to do there is look at anonymized, completely anonymized, not in the sense Twitter is already sort of anonymized if you want it to be, but it'll be dissociated from the actual tweets, but you'll be able to see the patterns and conditioning factors and be able to play around with those to see what the distributions are. Okay, so I'll start by giving you a very toy example of this in action, which shows you, I think, one thing that this might be useful for. So this is two construction. So in some varieties of British English, you can say where to is the supermarket, and there's another variant which is where is the supermarket to, which most speakers, which speakers from other areas and speakers outside Britain usually find ungrammatical because it's not directional, right? This doesn't mean where is the supermarket moving to, it just means where is it. There's not a huge amount of research on this, and this is why this is where Twitter might come in. If you've got a feature whose distribution is not clear, or is not clear outside stereotypes, we kind of know it's a feature of Bristol and Cardiff English, but now I'm going to show you what the distribution is on tweets and just out of it. I should say at this point, a proportion of you will be thinking that this doesn't work. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time defending it. We have written papers where we compare what you get from the Twitter data with reference distributions from gold standard sociolinguistic and dialectological studies. And you get very similar results, and where they're different, it's plausible that we're just looking at change in progress pretty much all of the time, provided that you're prepared to ignore a bit of noise. There will always be some noise on this data, which is either coding errors to do with the localization algorithm, or just people moving about. Sometimes people move and there's nothing in there on their Twitter account to show that. So, right, I'm going to show you some maps in a minute. In this case, I'm going to show you the frequency of these two constructions, so where to is the supermarket, where is the supermarket to. And it's what we're doing is the traditional sociolinguistic thing of working out what the set of alternatives is. So the obvious one is where is the supermarket, which is what everybody else might say. And there are a couple of other options. So what I'm going to show you is the instances of the where to constructions against the background of a comparator sample of the standard constructions. It's only a sample, it's not all of them, just because you end up with too many of the standard type. So where is the supermarket is so common in the data that it breaks your computer. So for that reason, the scales on this set aren't meaningful, because the frequency of where is the supermarket is arbitrary in the data. Right, so here are two maps. On the left, we've got the where is to construction, so where is the supermarket to, and the red, the darker it is, the more frequent the construction is in that area. We get a distribution which is plausible, given what we already know. So we know that it's thought to be characteristic of Cardiff, which is marked, and Bristol, which is just a little bit to the southeast of it, and those are both in the red area. This is suggestive that this construction is found across the whole of the southwest of England and across the whole of the south of Wales, and that's a distribution that you can very easily establish without doing quite extensive fieldwork. Sorry. The other thing that we notice is on the right, which is the where to is construction. Where to is the supermarket, and that's a subset of the first distribution. It's just a relatively small area in central South Wales, and that might lead you to develop an account of the relationship of the two constructions. The obvious suggestion is that the second one arises out of the first one, for instance. I won't take that any further for the moment, because as I say, I don't think there's really much background to this. I'll move on to look at a second construction that I'm going to be mainly talking about, and this is preposition drop in British English. And this is quite a well-researched construction, and I want to ask how the Twitter data can be integrated into this quite relatively rich literature. So to begin with the construction, if you haven't come across it, to forestall a question, this is not a feature of internet speech, internet communication, of internet writing. It is found in speech, and all of the previous studies have looked at, well, they've tended to look at grammaticality judgment data, and they tend to be by linguists who have this natively. And that's I think important. So the construction is that you can have no overt preposition in certain contexts where other varieties of English would have a preposition to. Okay, so you can say, today I'm going to the library, swim the end and back instead of swim to the end and back. She went to the pub instead of she went to the pub. I haven't been Shoreditch in ages. I haven't been to Shoreditch in ages. The linguists that have looked at this have identified it, they typically identify it as being a feature of one or a couple of relatively small areas. So it has been suggested that it's found in The Northwest, specifically mentioned are Lancashire, or specifically Southwest Lancashire, Liverpool, Manchester, London, and Kent. But we can't say an awful lot about its wider distribution because there haven't actually been studies of it anywhere else, right? So does it occur in Birmingham? Well, you might say no, because the literature doesn't mention that, but actually nobody has looked for it there. So one of the possibilities, one of the benefits of using this approach is that we may be able to extend our range without potentially fruitless fieldwork. Of course, the reason you might not want to go out and just look for it in Birmingham is that if it's not there, you haven't got any result at all, really. You can't really write about something not being there. Okay, this variation seems to be below the level of consciousness. That is, speakers who have this construction don't realize that the rest of the world doesn't, and actually the rest of the world finds it a bit weird. So this is a good candidate for variation currently undergoing change. I should say in a German context, of course, similar things have been noted for multicultural varieties of German and Scandinavian languages. And it has been suggested that this is a feature of multicultural London English. And I think it is, but the question that we might be able to answer here is whether it is characteristically a feature of that, i.e. not present in other varieties. Okay, so now the authors who've looked at this agree that there are syntactic differences between what you find in different varieties geographically. So Bailey 2018 looks at this in London and Kent, the southeast of England, and suggests the following 5 features of it. So determiner is obligatorily absent, so you can say, so in fact I'll carry on using the example of go to the gym. What that means is in the southeast variety you can say go gym, or you can use the standard form, of course, go to. The verb must be go or come, it can't be walk or run. The noun must be interpreted as a directional goal. You can go sharp, because that's a directional goal. But even if the word to would be used, otherwise you can't use it if it's not an actual goal. The noun must denote a familiar or anaphoric location or an institution, and modification is not possible. So you can't say I want to go straight pub. Now, not all of those characteristics hold for other varieties, or have been claimed not to hold. So in the Northwest, it's been suggested that the absence of the determiner is not a requirement in the Northwest, which means you can say I'm going the gym, which is ungrammatical for Bailey and presumably for speakers in the Southeast. There's been suggestion that the verb choice varies between varieties, and that it is wider in parts of the Northwest. So Myler, who's writing about Southwest Lancashire, says that come, go, run, drive, nip, and jog are all fine in this construction. And Biggs 2014, who's writing about Liverpool, says it's wider still in Liverpool, and includes things like plod or swim. And it's very unrestricted. The directional goal restriction is said not to apply in Liverpool, which means that actually the preposition omitted can logically be at and not to. So you could say, I'm working the library, which is ungrammatical for certainly for the southeast, and it's also been suggested that it's ungrammatical elsewhere in the northwest. And the modification test, or the modification property, is said not to hold in Liverpool, but does apply in Lancashire. Yes, so really quite close areas, but just a small distance apart, but a clear difference there. So one of the things I'm going to want to do is see how much of this we can establish from the Twitter data, and it's ongoing. Some of them we haven't worked out how to test yet, but some of them we'll show you. There's also the question of whether the Twitter data can say anything about the analyses of these constructions. So Myler analyzes the, so this is the Lancashire variety, so the slightly less permissive one, as involving a null preposition P, which incorporates to V and has to incorporate V in order to be licensed. And this gets you various properties. So the fact that it needs to incorporate into a V means that you can't say a trip, the pub, with a noun there. And it also, this incorporation is also blocked under non-adjacency. So that means in those varieties you can't say come with me the pub, whereas apparently in Liverpool you can. And this also limits the choice of verbs, since only an accusative V has the relative properties to appear in this construction, or to appear in this structure. Conversely, Biggs 2016 says that preposition drop in Liverpool is also a null P, but it's a null P that does not incorporate, it's kind of a real null P. It doesn't need to be licensed by anything. So that means I called it licensed by N, but what that really means is not licensed. I mean, it doesn't need licensing, so it can appear with N, and it's not dependent on adjacency for incorporation, so it doesn't need to be adjacent. It doesn't require an accusative V for the structure to be licit, and that gives you a lot more freedom in where it can appear. She also links it to differences in passivization, which it will be interesting to test, but I'm not going to talk about today. So given those two accounts, it's natural to wonder what the historical relationship between them is. Does one come out of the other, for instance? Traditionally, you might think that the more permissive variety is the place where the innovation originated and has gone further, if you like. Now, of course, all of this research is based on relatively small samples of speakers, so it's hard to be absolutely confident that these tactic differences are real and not based on idiosyncratic or dialectal properties of relatively small samples. And we also don't really know much more broadly geographically. So these samples of speakers have tended to be from rather narrow geographic areas. Rightly so, if you're writing about Southwest Lancashire, of course you want speakers all from Southwest Lancashire, but it makes it difficult to interpolate between the areas where there have been studies. So if there are systematic regional differences, we don't really know about them, and that itself would have some implications for variation and change. I'm thinking, as I've hinted already, of the obvious scenario which would be, I should say, obvious with a big red flashing warning sign, because this isn't where we're going. But the obvious thing to think is that the two are a single innovation, and that begins in a particular area spreads out from there, and in that area a subsequent innovation builds on the initial one. So that particular area, which in this case would be Liverpool, would have gone further and removed grammatical restriction. This is a scenario, kind of a wave-like spread of multiple connected innovations that we do find elsewhere, and it's a scenario that I found in the work to do with the second person singular pronoun, which does indeed work this way. There's one area, the area that's gone furthest in spreading to multiple grammatical contexts, is also the area where the innovation originated. Okay, so some predictions that we might try and test against the Twitter data. So is there ongoing change? So is there age, apparent time effects? Is there age variation? What is it restricted to the varieties on which studies have been done already? Does the syntax of the construction differ in the ways that have been suggested in the literature? And yeah, the final question is the one I just mentioned about the diachronic interpretation. So first of all, we'll start. This is the overall pattern, and I'm going to restrict it to the verb go, which is most straightforward. I need to remove your lovely faces so I can see them out myself. So this is the frame go plus optional preposition plus optional determiner. So this does not distinguish between the two varieties on whether the determiner is present. I'll come back to that in a second. Plus noun. So this would be this is go to the gym, go the gym, and go gym. And so redder areas have higher rates of omitting the preposition. So a dark red area would have high rates of go the gym and go gym combined, right? Those two are not distinguished on this map. I'm going to do that in a map in a second. So this is, I think, mainly consistent with the literature, but it tells us some other things. So we do find plenty of this in the Northwest. We do find it in London and the Southeast, but we do find it also across much of southern England. There are sort of two hotspots. There's another hotspot in the Midlands, sort of just around and to the east of Birmingham, and for reasons that aren't terribly clear, the far southwest seems to be a bit of a hotspot. If you don't believe there's variation, of course, you need to compare it to the places where it's absent. It's just absent in Scotland. It's absent in Northern Ireland, and it's absent in the northeast of England and most of Yorkshire. So there is variation, but the variation is sort of consistent with the literature, but we can say something a bit more. It also relates to the question of whether this is characteristic of multicultural London English. The answer is no. It's present there, but it is not a distinctive of London or any of that variety. Of course, that doesn't rule out the possibility that it may have originated there, but we think that's actually unlikely, and that presumably is a contrast with the German situation. Right. Yeah. Okay. So the next question is. Remember, it was said that the determiner was obligatorily absent in the southeast. Is that true? So this map shows you the distribution with the determiner present. Okay, so this is go to the gym versus go the gym with go gym removed. And when you do that, you get quite a different distribution. And yes, indeed, this is not found in the southeast. So the claim that the determinant is obligatorily absent in the southeast is strongly supported. It's in fact also true that the determinant is obligatorily absent across the whole of the south. And there's only one area where the determinant is not obligatorily absent, and that is around Liverpool, allowing for a certain amount of noise elsewhere. I've blown up the area around Liverpool on the right, and what you see is quite a nice, clear pattern whereby this is characteristic of Liverpool, its suburbs broadly defined, and an area to the southeast of Liverpool, but is not characteristic of Manchester. And this accords nicely with the studies by Biggs and Myler. So Myler was talking about southwest Lancashire, which is the, I don't know if you can see my cursor, I'm circling the area that he's talking about. It's just immediately above the word Liverpool on the map. And it does come out in the Twitter data as having preposition drop with determiner present. But this would suggest that that does not carry over to other varieties in the Northwest. So we shouldn't characterize this as something that's distinctive of the Northwest. It's distinctive of Liverpool, southwest Lancashire, and an area that's not been studied, but this area to the southeast of Liverpool. And so it would be interesting, for instance, to do a more fine-grained sociolinguistic study in that area to see what other properties hold, and whether the correlations that are found in existing work hold there. Okay, the next question: is it true that modification by straight and right are only found in the Northwest? Yes, this does hold up in the data. Basically, there's a lot less data for this. Obviously, the words straight and right are not very common in this construction, but this is the data for so go is lexically required, straight or right are lexically required, and then optional preposition, optional determiner, and then a noun. And you basically see that the hotspot for this is Liverpool, and basically the same area, or perhaps a subset of it that we saw before. So the claim that there is an association between allowing modification and allowing the determiner to be present holds up well in the Twitter data, and that's quite a strong test of that claim, and it's nice to see it holding up. I'm going to move on now to look at age distribution. This is slightly different data set because it's the pilot data set and it's all verbs. But I thought it was interesting to show this. If we do a smooth age distribution of the whole across all of the constructions, all of the preposition drop constructions, both of them, we see that overall there is age grading. There's apparent time. So the younger speakers use it at higher rates than older speakers, and there's kind of an S-curve there. Here are a couple of maps. As I said, the distribution you get is slightly different from the one I showed you with go, although it's broadly the same, but it's a bit, the highs and lows are slightly different. But the crucial thing here is that you can see that in the younger speakers, we just get much higher levels. Pretty much everywhere where it's going to end up, obviously not in Scotland, Northern Ireland, or the Northeast. And in the over 60s, it's barely present at all. And okay, there are patches in the middle age group. Notice the middle age group also doesn't really support the idea, and this is where we're sort of going. It doesn't really support the idea that this arises in Liverpool. It's not the original hotspot. If we look at and then this is another crucial piece of data, is looking at the difference in age distribution of the two versions of this, with the article and not with the article. This shows you that the age distribution with the article is relatively stable. The increase in the construction is actually due to the no article version, and this is leading us to think that maybe the two are actually different constructions. I've been trying to be a bit ambiguous about whether this is one or two constructions, but the difference in the age distribution would be an argument for thinking that they're two different constructions. And this is again sort of where we're going. So indeed, this is where we've gone. So interpretation of all of this, there are two. I'm going to suggest that there are probably two constructions. One which allows the definite article is stable in apparent time and restricted to a relatively small area sense of Liverpool, and the second construction which does not allow the definite article increasing in apparent time and is diffusing in space across a large area of much of England. The obvious prediction, of course, is that the construction is most constrained in the region in which it is oldest, and that would be the claim that 2 is the wider one. 1 is the precursor to 2, but it doesn't really look like that holds up, especially given the age distribution, the differences in which the rates of change. Another possibility might be that the change is due to dialect contact between, or the innovation of one of the constructions is due to dialect contact between them. That's possible, but it's not clear that that's really consistent with the geographic distribution. There's also the question that we typically ask in sort of grammaticalization and syntactic change more generally, which is which of the grammars is bigger. The Liverpool grammar appears to have semantic bleaching and loss of incorporation compared to the non-Liverpool one. Now, bleaching is reasonably the sort of thing that you might arise out of earlier grammar. So that might suggest that 1 arises out of 2. The Liverpool type arises out of the non-Liverpool type. Loss of incorporation with the new item being merged in the base position. That's not so expected, because that's loss of movement that does happen. But we might more obviously expect loss of movement to result in a new item being merged at the former target of movement position. So it's not straightforward to relate the two. I mean, I think that's what I'm trying to say here. It's not straightforward to relate the two as one being derived from the other. If you have any suggestions, please ask. So I'm coming to the conclusion that independent innovation is also quite plausible, that the two are just not related to one another. The Liverpool type is an older, more traditional innovation, and the non-Liverpool type is a newer one. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up there. I've suggested some ways in which media data can provide new directions for work in variationists and historical linguistics, and isn't just of interest to people interested in the mechanics of what the internet does to human language. And I'll open up to questions there. Thank you.